this tutorial on science of weight loss and muscle gain. So the whole concept behind this tutorial is to teach you guys the principles behind either losing body fat and weight or putting on muscle, sculpting, toning, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. But it's super, super important to understand the principles behind how these mechanisms work as opposed to just copying methods. Because what we do is then we'll follow the keto diet, or we'll follow the low sugar diet, or we follow whatever's diet, or, isogenics, whatever else, and we don't actually understand the concepts of how this works. Whereas if we take the time to understand the principles, we are then able to maintain our results and also, I suppose, peak more or better results in the future. So it's about getting those results, but also maintaining them. All right, so key point once again for you guys is to understand the principles of how these mechanisms work, because then you understand the rules by which you have to abide by if you expect to keep these results. Okay, so that being said, what do we need to be healthy? So from a nutritional aspect, I'm sure most of you know this already. We need our macronutrients, which is a protein, our carbohydrates, CHO down the bottom there, and fats. Those are our macronutrients. Macro because we need them in large amounts. Then we also need our micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, magnesium, selenium, zinc, all those sorts of things that we require at a smaller level, a micro level, so that cellular functions and processes can take place. We also require fiber and fluids, and yes, there's some calories in fiber, not much, but all of the stuff that we actually get is required. They all play functions in the body. They all have vital roles. So protein is really, really important for muscle regeneration. So protein synthesis, as it's called, or muscle building for a more simplistic term. We also need it from immune system response. Right? So a lot of our immune bodies, our immune system requires proteins in order to keep and maintain that. We require fats. Fats is a primary energy source for the brain. Also, in terms of the cells, around every cell is a little fat coating, so it's used as a protective mechanism within the cell. We also have fats which can store toxins or problems that are higher liver burdens for the liver or the detoxification pathways of the body to deal with. They're often sent to fat. Fats are also required in terms of the hormones. So if you think about your hormones like estrogen and testosterone, those are fat-based hormones. So if you remove those macronutrients, you run into problems straight away. Carbohydrates are always the primary fuel source of the brain. So the key point here, guys, is if you remove any macronutrient, which is what a lot of diets do, low carb diet, low fat diet, no fat diet, low protein, no protein diet, what happens is you run into problems on which those pathways are based. So really good example is girls that go on a low-fat diet and then start to run into a lot of hormonal issues. Another really good example is someone that's on the Atkins diet or a very low-carb-based diet and starts to run into digestive disorders because they are very low in fiber. And fiber is going to feed the good bacteria in your body. It's also going to clean out the colon. So if we remove anything, we start to run into problems. And there's a really good research by a guy called Weston A. Price from many, many years ago that traveled all around the world and looked at all these different tribes, the Inuits of South America, the Eskimos, the Aboriginals, the Maori in New Zealand. And he traveled around and he found that all of these people included all these macronutrients in their diet. And depending on the region, some of them, like in Alaska, the Inuits, the Eskimos, they had a very low carbohydrate-based diet, so primarily protein and fat. And it's just because of the resources around there. The Quechan Indians of South America had a very high carbohydrate-based diet. The reason being is catching animals, and large animals are a little bit few and far to come by there. So they had a lot of corn, maize, that sort of stuff. So the geographical region of which someone was based tend to influence their diet a lot. Hence why during the summer and winter seasons, your nutritional intake demands tend to change. A lot heavier, meaty, fatty foods in winter, and a lot more lighter, kind of hard, carbohydrate, fruity-based meals in summer. That tends to be how it works. So our nutritional intake is also generally seasonal in nature. But going back to it, the primary concept here is none of these diets removed a macronutrient. They all maintain those macronutrients in them. So if you ever come across a diet that removes a macronutrient altogether, I would question it. There are ways in which it can be sustained, right? There's outliers there that can sustain these diets. But what we have to understand is there's a rebound or a cost to doing all of these diets. So a really good example at the moment is like the keto diet. But anyone that I know has done isogenics or keto diets swears by it whilst they're on it. The problem is there is a rebound effect. There's adaptive properties of the body which makes it really efficient at dealing with that. Bear in mind there's trade-offs now. Remember, if you're low in fiber, we might have digestive problems. Also, as soon as we rebound or change our diet, if we can't maintain that, we will tend to regain our original weight, if not more. That is important because unless you can sustain it over the Christmas period and you're not going to drink anything, you're not going to have anything carb-based, and you're just going to stick to the meats, which is fine if you can do it. Remember, there's still trade-offs like with fiber and everything else. If you're not getting your micronutrients, you're also going to run into problems, which is what a lot of these diets do. So you have to make sure you're covering the bases, because if you're not covering the bases, one, as soon as you change your diet back to a more standardized diet, you're going to regain your weight. And two, if you stay on that diet, you're going to be missing some of these micro or macronutrients in other areas which are going to cause deficiencies in the body. So it's really, really important. It can be done, but it needs to be done well, and most people do not do it well. So just to kind of re-illustrate this, all diets, any diet you've ever been on or tried or heard about, Atkins diet, Pritikin's diet, South Beach diet, Jenny Craig, isogenics, keto, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's all the same. What all of them use is they basically restrict energy intake through three major mechanisms. One, through food types, like the whole food diet is another really good one, or paleo, right? So they tend to make you eat less. Why? Because you tend to eat whole foods, which means you tend to consume less calories. And they've actually done papers on this where they get people to eat paleo versus basically anything they want, non-paleo based foods, and the calorie intake naturally progresses to less on a paleo based diet. That is just naturally how, as soon as you get whole foods, like a lot of vegetables and stuff, they're a lot more filling, and so they kind of hit that basis. So you're not eating as much. Whereas a lot of junk food, like a lot of things that are high in fat and sugar, are very moreish. So you tend to want to eat a lot more. So you tend to overeat. Macronutrients, anything, again, like when their diet, a no sugar diet, for example, they remove an entire macronutrient. And what they found is when they do this, it naturally reduces the total caloric intake or energy intake. Portion sizes, Jenny Craig, isogenics, whatever, they tend to restrict the amount of food you can eat and so therefore reduce portion sizes. Ultimately, every single one of these, bar none, reduces energy intake. That is important. That is a driving factor for either decreasing your body fat and weight, or in reverse, if you're overeating, increasing it. Okay, I'll put a reference for this in the notes later on, but 95% of diets fail. This is a huge study that basically looked at multiple diets. It's called a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, and they find time and time again, once people revert their diet, they do dietary changes, they're on a diet for a period of time, they get results. But the problem is, as soon as they revert away from that diet and resume a normal eating patterns, they tend to regain their original weight, if not more. That is crazy to think that you've done all this hard work, and if you don't come out of it properly, you will regain that original weight. So why did you do it in the first place? Now, there's times that we can do this if you've got a wedding or you want to look good for summer and all that sort of stuff. Brilliant. There's times that we can do this. But at the end of this, we have to understand how we come out of that properly so we mitigate or reduce the amount of weight and body fat that we regain afterwards. That's important, and that's the whole premise of what we're going to teach in the diet plans and in our challenges. We get results, but we need to understand how we maintain those by understanding the principles. So I hope this is making sense to you guys so far, because what I ultimately want for you, all of you, is to get your results and keep them. So regardless of where you go in the future and what you do, you understand the rules by which you have to abide. And if you're doing a diet at any place, you will get results. If you're training, as you'll see in a second, and you follow a nutrition plan that's following the rules of restricting calories, you will lose weight, body fat, you'll look leaner. But if you don't follow that ongoing, you will regain that original weight, if not more, over time, within 1 to 5 years. It's a slow process, but it happens. Hence why consistency is king. Okay, so energy intake. Most people in Western society tend to eat a diet more like here on the left, the typical diet, much too high in fats and much too high in refined sugars. Whereas what we recommend, and this recommended diet, changes with each individual. This is a guideline. Some people are going to be higher carbs, some people are going to be lower carbs. This is a kind of estimate in the middle. It varies based on the individual. So fat around about 30%, protein around about 25%. You'll see refined sugars around about 5%. So you still have them, you just reduce the total amount you're consuming. And carbohydrates from vegetables, that sort of sources, we're looking around about 40-45%. So that's a guideline, and when we get to stuff like tracking in MyFitnessPal, it's a good basis to start, but some of you will change those ratios based on the information I give you. Okay, but it's a good starting point. Here's what's important. When most people talk about increasing their metabolism, so you'll hear all these promotional crap all the time talking about boost your metabolism. And when we actually understand where metabolism comes from, right, and where this total energy expenditure comes from, we'll understand that all of this stuff is it's lies. It's manipulation to make you buy their products or sell whatever it is they're trying to sell you. So the 66% here is your basal metabolic rate. Let's just see if I can bring all this in. All right, so our 66% is our basal metabolic rate, our metabolism. But if you look at this table up in the blue here, the total calories that makes up this blue area actually comes from 200 to 440 kilocalories per kilogram come from your internal organs, your liver, your brain, your kidneys, that function. Those in the viscera, the organs, chew up the vast majority of those calories. That's where most of that 66 comes from. Whereas what we talk about by training, yes, you can by increasing skeletal muscle, but that's only 13.2, right, per kilocal per kilogram. So what it's telling you is when we're doing muscle is very metabolically active, but not nearly as metabolically active as your viscera, your organs. So what that means is those guys working well is going to chew up far more calories than putting on lean muscle. That's important. And if you've ever done this, if you've ever spent a day studying or working really hard using your brain and you're super hungry and you're like, I've done nothing, that's a really good example of the brain chewing up a lot of calories, but you haven't actually done anything. You haven't moved off your seat all day. So it's really important to understand that most of this basal metabolic rate can't be really affected by boosting it with a supplement or something along those lines. Most of it really comes from the function of our viscera or our organs, and that just comes from treating them well, getting all the micronutrients in, getting all the macronutrients in, exercising, breathing properly. That will improve the function of your internal organs. That just comes from the basic things that you guys know. Eat well, move well, live well, think well. Super simple. All right. So skeletal muscle, yes, as you can see here, it can increase. So if you increase your skeletal muscle, you're going to burn more calories. But again, once again, not nearly as much as the viscera. All right, so this other stuff, where do all these other calories that we expend in a day come from? So I'm going to leave adaptive thermogenesis to the last, but that's an important one. So our first one comes from the thermic effect of exercise. Now, we've got something called NEAT, which is non-exercise adaptive thermogenesis, which really just means like if you're fidgeting, you're moving around a lot, you've got a lot of movement there. So exercise, the thermic effect of exercise can come from trained exercise, like what you do in a program, going for a run, lifting weights. Oops, so just ignore that. But it can also come from fidgeting. Some people are really fidgetive or move around a lot, walk a lot in the day. So what happens is, going back to adaptive thermogenesis now, is when we exercise or we restrict calories too much, we find there's an adaptive thermogenesis, which means this natural fidgeting or moving around or walking starts to reduce in people, which reduces the total calories that they will expend in a day. So if you think about it, if you go too low on calories and you're training like crazy, yes, you're improving the exercise, right? This slice of the pie here, the 17%. But what's going to happen is you're also going to reduce this adaptive thermogenesis because your body's going to start to slow down and start preserving energy. So instead of coming home and being real busy and moving around, you're going to come on and just lie on the couch and collapse. You're going, instead of walking as much as you normally do, you'll be like, oh, I want to take the escalator and I want to take the lift, and you're not going to move around as much, which means total size of the pie now stays more or less kind of the same. So it's important that we don't drop the calories too much or train too hard, because this natural adaptive thermogenesis, this ability to like fidget and all these other calories that we don't even notice we're burning in a day, will reduce as well. So although we're increasing one side of the pie, we're reducing the other side of the pie, which is balancing out. So we don't want to do that. That's why restricting calories too much or training too much can result in a negative result. Okay, now there's also a thermal effect of food. So eating certain foods, it takes energy to break down foods, and foods that are really good for that. So weight loss is protein. So that's why people trying to lose weight, it's a really good idea to have a minimal doses of protein there, which I'll talk about in your meal plans. Why exercise works? Very simply, exercise increases the slice of total energy expenditure. So what that means is from 17, when you start exercising, yes, you get a larger piece of the pie, and therefore the total pie increases and you start to burn more calories. That's why exercise works. Right? We know that. You burn more calories when you exercise. I hope that's obvious for most of you. However, calories work better. And the old saying is you cannot out-train a bad diet. If you guys are not marrying your nutrition with your exercise, you will not get good results. And it's been shown time and time again in the scientific literature that if you compare someone that just does exercise versus just nutrition versus diet and exercise gets the best result, followed by nutrition, followed by just exercise. So again, it's super important to understand that if you do not marry your nutrition with your training program, you cannot expect to get good results. Okay, so why do calories work better? Calories work better because your energy input is less than your energy output. So if I'm putting in X amount of calories, say 2,000, but I'm spending 2,200 in a day, I'm going to lose weight. Same happens in reverse. So if I put in more energy, say I'm putting in 4,000 a day and I'm expending 3,500, then I'm going to gain weight. Now, ideally, most of that would be muscle if you're training properly, but of course, there is generally some weight gain in terms of fat as well. So it's really, really important that we do that slowly. If it's too high, a lot of it's stored with calories. If it's too low, we're not really getting the results, the optimum muscle growth that we could hope for. So it's important that we get these numbers right. And once again, I'm going to explain that when you do the nutrition plans of how to do this correctly. All right, so at this point, you guys should understand it's all about the energy versus energy out equation. So this is a bit of a summary for you guys. Recap. It's really about calories. The number one thing that we need to be concerned about is calories. Calories is number one. If you're not doing or focusing on your calories, either through meal plans that are done for you or through calorie counting using something like MyFitnessPal, you cannot expect to either be putting on muscle or leaning muscle. Training alone will not suffice. It's really, really important that you understand that. Macronutrients. At this point, you should understand that we're not eliminating any macronutrient. We personally do not believe in it. Are there ways you can do it? Yes, but there are pros and cons to that, right? There are trade-offs, and you have to understand and respect those trade-offs. It's the same as if you're a vegetarian or vegan, right? There are trade-offs with that. Like if you're not getting whole protein sources, right, you are reduced or limited in your complete or essential amino acids for the day. And that's why a lot of people who are vegetarians run into problems, especially with stuff like iron and hemoglobin and muscle building, because it's not done properly. Can it be done properly? 100%. Yes, it can. There are even vegan and vegetarian bodybuilders, natural bodybuilders, that look amazing because they understand the principles. But our concept is we're never going to remove a macronutrient, right? We incorporate all of them. Rather, we focus on getting the minimal amounts that we require for our goal and then focusing on calories. Micronutrients, again, deficiency. So we want to make sure that we're getting our micronutrients, and that generally comes from getting enough whole food. Do you only have to eat whole food? No. Is whole food enough? Not always, but some of the times. And if we run into problems, the gold standard is getting blood tests for that. We're not going to do that at this point. We can also look at your nutrition plans if you're doing the advanced nutrition plans with us, and we can actually work out from your meals, or if you're using something like MyFitnessPal, if there's deficiencies in your diet of certain micronutrients, i.e. magnesium, zinc, whatever it might be. And you can do that by tracking your food. Meal timing and frequency. This is really far less important than people give it credit for. Hence why it's at the top of the pyramid. It has very, very little effect in terms of results compared to calories, macros, and micronutrients. Substantially smaller. So that means people worry, should they eat 6 meals a day? Should they have one big meal? And the science tends to show that it doesn't really matter as long as you get enough calories in, the right macronutrient qualities, and you've got your minimum amount of micronutrients. And then meal timing doesn't really matter. It does matter if you're not following those 3 big rules. So, long story short, we're focusing on calories, macronutrients, and micronutrients in all of our nutrition plans and all of our eating from here on out. And then supplements, what everyone's trying to sell you is, once again, it's at the top. There's no metabolic boosting supplement that you can take. Not if you're not following calories, macros, and micronutrients. It's going to have a smidge of an effect on you. You cannot expect results by taking supplements alone. Not if you're missing these bigger portions of the pyramid. And that's really, really important to understand. Do they have their place? Yes, once you've looked after everything else. So a lot of people have deficiencies in terms of certain micronutrients, and that's why we recommend some to you in this program. But if you're getting them from a whole food-based diet, you don't need them. They're only if you are limited in those certain micronutrients Common one tends to be magnesium and zinc. That's why I keep going on about, because it's deficient in around about 70% of the population. So those are some micronutrients or supplements that you might want to look at taking. But anything that's telling you boosting metabolism or anything along that lines is a lie unless you're following these other bases of the pyramid. Hope that makes sense for you guys, and hope you've learned a little bit here about how we're going to structure all of our plans and the principles behind how each of these diets work. Hope it helps. Crack into the next section and let's get started.